Well, hey there team, welcome back to the channel and welcome to my review of Victoria 3. So this is a little bit of out of season and it's jumped the queue to the front of the queue because I fell down a rabbit hole playing this last night, played it for many hours as part of Steam's free to try period that they're doing for the weekend, and it's also half price if you do want to pick it up. And so that's me, I loved it, I've picked it up, I've really enjoyed it, I highly recommend it. So unusually I'm pushing this out earlier so that by the time this video posts, you yourself could Alt-Tab, go and install it, try it out for the next couple of days and see for yourself. Again, my only rule that I stipulate is $5 for an hour, right? I give you $5, you give me a good, clean hour loop. Victoria's going for $69.95 Australian, which is 14 hours. Again, in this particular case, I didn't want to wait another day, though I would gladly play it even longer. I've put about half that time. I've put about 7.5 hours into it now, and I can't get enough of it. As soon as I finish recording this, I'm going to boot it back up. It's a wild ride, and I'm really enjoying it. So yes, I highly recommend it. A little bit unusual as far as my review method goes. Having said that, I'd be curious if you do try it out yourself. Drop me a comment, let me know. It'd be cool to see if this reaches anyone before that window closes. So at the front, Victoria 3 is a Paradox game, and they have a certain style, a certain rhythm of doing things. I am only a fair weather fan. However, I've dipped into them recently, specifically with Star Trek Infinite, which I love. And I'm just a normie, mainstream dude. There's a whole angry, probably vocal minority mob of Paradox enthusiasts, let's say, that vehemently hate that Star Trek game because it wasn't made for them. And I should probably review it because there's some interesting thoughts around it. But generally speaking, a game built upon Stellaris's engine from a few years back. It was an absolute trip as a Star Trek fan, and it got me back into Paradox games. A part of the reason why I'm trying Victoria 3 here is because of how successfully Star Trek Infinite got me hooked with its narrative setups and components. Anyway, look, it's not a review about Star Trek Infinite. Let me know if you want to see that, we'll do that. But my point is, that was a really good baby's first intro game for bringing mainstream normies into the fold. And honestly, Victoria 3 is a great second step. Now, it's dense, it's heavy duty, but it is as accessible as you could make a game that is just overwhelmingly full of lots of moving parts. So the broad strokes of what this covers is essentially the industrialization of the 19th century. Your game goes for an 100-year period, and it covers that really tumultuous time where you effectively had this gigantic tech spike on the back of heavy industrialization and mechanization of industry. So your economy follows that path, that tech, and also the tumultuous political landscape that gets blown up then when all of a sudden workers, what they can do, their rights, all that sort of stuff really gets thrown in the blender because something that had been a kind of a steady rhythm for hundreds of years changes over the course of like a couple of decades. It's actually really fascinating stuff as far as a theme goes. As far as the mechanics, this is very much an economic simulator. Its focus, as I understand it, is on you, your country, and getting that country moving economically and going with the times. There is a warfare component because it's necessary, because you wouldn't just leave that out. But it's not a warfare game. And funnily enough, scrolling through a lot of the Steam reviews, which are quite telling, all the recent ones of people enjoying it like me, the normies trying it for free, we're all thumbs up, positive. It's the doomers that, that are very angry at Paradox for whatever reason, that dislike this game so much. And a big comment that seems to come up is the military part. I would hazard if you're so interested in military, you should be playing Hearts of Iron 4. What this game does is it takes the economic component of Hearts of Iron 4 and blows that out, turns it into its whole own game. The pitch that will get some of you nerds like me over the line is such. You can do a tutorial campaign, and if you saw me cover Star Trek Infinite on the channel, they had a similar sort of thing, and I think maybe they do that for everything Stellaris and all that, but I haven't gone back to those in quite a while. But essentially, you can start a campaign where the game is going to hold your hand, it's going to throw little journal missions at you to keep you on track and teach you the mechanics. It's a learning campaign that goes for many hours, or as long as you really want to go. The real cherry on the top is that as it tells you to do something, it'll give you 2 buttons underneath. The first button is show me how to do this, and then the second button is tell me why I should do this. And this is the magic. You can just click on the top one and it will essentially slideshow you through. It'll go press this button, press that button. It will show you how to do it, and no idiot left behind. It will show you very well. However, if you click on the other option, it will go into the mechanics and explain them. And you have these pop-ups within pop-ups in these windows that you can mouse over, and you can go, oh, well, what's this? What's that? And there's a million different terms, a million different mechanics, but the game is actually incredibly good at showing you all that information. So yes, information overload, but I don't think you would want it any other way if you are legitimately trying to learn this game on your own. So that got me hooked when I tried that out. The next point is this. This game sits in one of those simulation niches and that really appeals to me, but they can be hard to sort of come by, where there is a civilian economy or private economy, whatever you'd like to call it, but there is an economy on your team separate from you, the government, the state, operates under its own auspices. Things that come to mind are Distant Worlds 2 does something similar to that, where you have private ships going out and building their own platforms and delivering things back and forth, trying to turn a profit for the little individual AI dude's benefit, and you have an economy that gets built upon that, and you sort of poke and prod it for the interest of the state. And another one, funnily enough, is City Skylines 2. Kind of similar, but if you click on individual little houses and that, they grow, they fall, they turn profits, they move from, lower to middle class, and businesses grow based on essentially getting ahead on the profit margin and then reinvesting that money into whatever they deem necessary. I love whatever you would call that. And this game does the same sort of thing. A brief example would be if I set up like a lumber mill or something like that within my territory, and it has an outcome versus income component, and it depends on market prices, but it essentially engages with your local market and markets beyond. And as long as demand works out, and I don't need to give you an economics lesson, but as long as they're turning a healthy profit and they're covering the living wages of their employees, it will go into like a cash kitty that then goes into a sort of like investment pool of the investor class of your states and country. Now, if you have spare construction sites, I don't know what they're called, but they're essentially buildings that enable the construction of more buildings. You will have a default government setting, and you can change all of this stuff. This is how Paradox games go. You can tweak the rules, but generally speaking, you have this sort of default rebuilding setting where you 50-50 split the output of your construction buildings with the private economy. So you're going to be there taking government funds and fueling them into building whatever the fuck you think you should build. If you need to give them a stimulated economy, or if you have to build rail lines because you have an infrastructure cap that you need to manage, you do what you're going to do, or not at all. You can just not. Meanwhile, the profit margin that gets saved up by the successful businesses gets reinvested by interested parties, and they'll start building all sorts of crap as well. Like they'll build ports and railways if they need more infrastructure cap, or they'll build bloody opium farms if that's where the money is. So it's so cool to watch that happen, and I don't think you can really just let it run and do its own thing. So yeah, really cool to see all those moving parts, and the AI sort of keeps you on track a little bit. There is all sorts of policy making, and funnily enough, the politics abroad is not as fleshed out, but that makes sense. Again, that's why I was so vehement about it. There is a military component, and it's almost copy pasted from some of the other titles, and it's not very complex, but that's fine. That's not what the draw is. Same goes for negotiating with others. There is a colonialization component, and you can sort of, open up and be friendly and improve relations with each other, but that's about it as well. It is about the internal machinations of your country. You have a whole bunch of different subclass area. You got ideological type people. You got the intelligentsia, I think is what it's called. Then you've got industrialists, you've got the workers, and then you've got a bunch of them that just aren't politically aligned, and you've got to keep them all happy. And if you don't keep them happy, you start to get these sort of rebel type characters that cause trouble. You have anarchists right up. And, you know, they're not overtly terroristic in their actions, not at first at least, but it's more that they aren't having their needs met, so they start to get a bit huffy and petition for change in government policy. It sounds complicated, it sounds a bit boring to be honest, but it's actually done really well. Essentially, if you're not looking after your people, they're going to start chucking a huff and they're going to start petitioning you for policy change, and if you push back on them, you might find yourself in a revolt civil war situation. But ultimately, it keeps you on track. It stops you treating you guys like shit. Well, not too much. There's a standard of living that you have to massage as well. You've got immigration policy between your different states. So maybe you're trying to develop the slum island. I don't know what it was called, but I was playing as Sweden, and they've got, no offense to the Swedes, but they've got this little island off their east coast, and that thing was just fucking broken as anything. And I poured so much effort into just trying to uprise it, you know, very egalitarian. I'm like, yeah, let's bring these guys up that give less than 0% to my GDP, mind you. And I managed to bankrupt Sweden in 10 years. So then what did I do then? I filed for bankruptcy, and guess what? That made that little island even worse. They didn't like me very much after I took what little savings they had. But stuff them. I was trying to help. All sorts of cool stuff happens as well. Events, you've seen this stuff before in Paradox games. Kind of this narrative that ebbs and flows. I got into a situation where, for whatever reason, yeah, I was trying to boost bloody homeless island. I couldn't get anyone to go there. I was using all my edicts and everything to try and entice them. People were like, nope, not for all the candy in the shop. I'm not gonna go live in that shithole. And so I was like, well, we can try and boost birth rate. So how about we try some regressive policy and we remove women's rights. So they had a proprietary right component where they're allowed to keep things. That was the law when I stepped into Sweden, is that they're allowed to have items and pass them down. That sort of thing. It's like, nope, we can't have that. Put them back into property for men because that's going to increase the birth rate by 5%. And guess what? Sweden just fucking loved it. It ran through and people were campaigning for it, and bloody the law passed itself by the time I put it up for discussion in the public. I had a 90% pass rate. People were begging to go back a bit more based, a bit more trad. So I mean, that didn't fix any of my problems, and after that, we had all sorts of issues where, what did they want? They wanted me to take the church out of schools, so all sorts of crazy stuff going on, and I don't know, I pushed back on them and suppressed the workers, and yeah, it got bad. We had a civil war, coming out of bankruptcy. Some bloke suicide bombed my king. No one liked the prince. The minute the prince got elected, we gave women's rights back. So, like, the point is that it creates this whole emergent story, and here I am just trying to bloody build a couple of farms and that sort of thing. So, yeah, it's actually, it looks complex and there are complex systems underneath it, but once you figure out that it's like, well, you know, I just need to build this up and I don't want to go over my essentially cap, because you have an infrastructure cap. But as you urbanize and move from the older tech into the new, which I personally, you know, as a dude that once upon a time had an engineering career, I just find it so fascinating looking at all the cool boilers and trains being invented and all. Oh, it's so good, man. So it appeals to me very specifically. But as far as this economic simulator, the examples I gave earlier, Distant Worlds and City Skylines, if you do find yourself fascinated by these automated worlds that you trying to nudge the needle, but you're still like a small fish in a big pond and you have to play by the game's rules, then you'll probably love this. Anyway, look, I had a really good time with it and I'm going to play some more. It is a lot more free form. It has those stories that emergently come out as you go along. But if I were to compare it to, say, my other touchstone, which was the Star Trek Infinite game, that felt a lot more narratively cohesive. I don't want to talk spoilers or anything like that, but it had some really cool events and essentially mission-driven narrative. You had trees you could go down, and anyway, I don't want to get sidetracked, but my point was that felt a little bit more linear/driven, dare I say, which might not appeal to the usual Paradox fare, whereas this is a lot more sandbox. The game is very forthright. I believe it has a splash saying there's no win condition. You play for your 100 years and you try and look after your country as best you can and overcome the issues. And that's fine. Under that mission statement, it achieves exactly what it's trying to do. And I had an absolute blast. I then started a second playthrough. I tried Van Diemen's Land, bloody Tasmania, so it's pre-Australia. So played as them, and my God, it's hard when you have literally one region trying to get that out. And I built ports, and then I was importing clippers because I needed that to increase my infrastructure. And then, oh my God, then I ended up in a financial death spiral. I couldn't build iron mines fast enough. Anyway, my point is there's a lot going on there. I don't know if it's necessarily going to convert people if they're not a fan of Paradox games. However, I'm an example of someone, I look at all the 10,000 DLCs and I go, ugh, I have a bit of a reaction myself personally, and yet here I am playing this. I kind of fell into it, if we're being honest. I gave it an off-the-cuff go, and before you knew it, I lost my weekend to it. So maybe you should give it a go if you feel the same way. You might just find yourself falling in love with it. I should revisit Crusader Kings 3 because I put a lot of hours into that when it came out, because that's even further up the other end of the scale. It's way less about kingdom management. It's more dynasty management. I don't mean to sidetrack, but again, I feel that I'm a voice that enjoys Paradox games, but I'm not really drinking the Kool-Aid of all I do is play Paradox games. I play everything. So I think I sit in a uniquely accessible position, I suppose. Dare I say, more representative of the newer audience that maybe Paradox would try and tap. Anyway, at this point, I'm just waffling. Game's brilliant, really good. It's worth giving a go, especially if you catch this review during that period where it's still free to try out on Steam. Highly recommended for your time and money, even outside of that. This game is worth full price. I won't dance around that. You'll get the money spent back tenfold, easily. But that does depend on whether you enjoy this loop that is very Paradox, it's very nerdy, and it's not super warlike or anything like that. It is an economy simulator. Anyway, team, might just leave it there for the time being. I'll catch you guys on the next one.